Let's talk about long COVID. Now, long COVID is always the first thing that those who've been trying to encourage us to have as few freedoms as possible over the last couple of years reach for. Whenever COVID cases, COVID deaths, COVID hospitalizations go down, yes, but what about long COVID? Well, a recent report has suggested that 2 million people in this country are suffering from long COVID. Of course, this is their own perception of what they are suffering from. But the Royal College of Nursing has called for increased investment in long COVID research and care amid what they call a postcode lottery right now. Let's talk to Dr. Bharat Pankania, who's a senior clinical lecturer at the University of Exeter Medical School and joins us. Good morning to you, Bharat.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you so much for joining us. Let's first of all talk about long COVID itself. There is no doubt at all there are people who have had either very serious COVID, been hospitalised in ICU, and some who've had very mild doses of COVID, who have suffered from long-term repercussions, damage to their organs, heart problems we know is an issue, and there's no doubt at all it does exist. But when we talk about long COVID, we also include people who've, not got their full sense of smell or taste back, or people who feel a bit fatigued as opposed to sort of chronically fatigued. How do we know if someone is suffering from long COVID when a lot of these, this data is, the official data estimates 2 million people are experiencing long COVID, but it's a question, do you think you're suffering from long COVID? And people say, yes, I do. I mean, that's not science.
No, of course not, Julia. That is not science. And let's just talk a few seconds about what long COVID is. So long COVID is a number of signs and symptoms further to an infection with the SARS-CoV-2 virus, a persistence of a set of signs and symptoms. That is all we know at the moment. Some of these signs and symptoms, unfortunately, tragically, will be forever. Yeah. So, for example, if you have got a seriously fibrosed, damaged lung, it is not suddenly, miraculously going to recover. The other things are that we're learning that this SARS-CoV-2 virus may be a super antigen. In other words, it comes, it goes, but when it comes in some people, as you said, whether they had mild or serious illness, it's not irrelevant, but it leaves their body then carrying on doing the damage. Yeah. In other words, a super immune response to the arrival of that virus, and then that damage goes on. We don't really have a defined test or a defined set of signs and symptoms which then says you've got long COVID. So yes, we've got to do more research to find out exactly how do you define it, rather than a series of signs and symptoms, and then what do you do?
Well, indeed, and there were some surveys asking people about various symptoms, because often it's like, are you suffering from any or a collection of various symptoms? And they range from, loss of sense of smell, and I lost mine, sense of smell and taste, for pretty much a year. It took a very long time to come back after I caught it in March 2020. Didn't have that issue at all when I got Omicron at the beginning of this year. But certainly really great fatigue for weeks on end that I certainly felt. But some people, again, we know, chronically, perfectly healthy people who are chronically affected. But when they did surveys asking people, do you have any of these symptoms, they found that in the general population of people who had very much a view that they had not had COVID and never tested positive for it, they had exactly the same percentage of people claiming to feel that way. A lot of people think this is just how people feel a lot of the time. People feel tired. And when I looked at some of the symptoms in one of the surveys, and I thought, I'm in my 50s, I feel like that every day. But also, a lot of it may be also down to the persistent effects of lockdown. A lot of people's lives really changed. The mental and physical toll that has taken on our bodies is going to be there for decades.
I totally agree with you. And to disentangle from this fog of vague signs and symptoms as to this is really long COVID, very difficult. You're reminding me, as you were saying, so when I was a young GP, we had this thing called ME arrive. And I remember it was vague and woolly and unsure and no specific test. And I used to struggle as a GP saying, well, what is ME and what is just normal, I am tired? So we are in similar territory, but we will do better with long COVID because there's a lot of money being poured into it. Yeah. And I hope there will be some definitive blood tests or something that are objective so that we can say, you've got these markers, you've got these signs and symptoms, we therefore think you have persistence of infection.
We know there's a lot of money going into a very close family member of mine who had some heart problems a couple of weeks ago was advised by a cardiologist, you're not going to get anything through the NHS, but go to a long COVID clinic. Heart problems may be, if you've had any problems before, may be related to long COVID. They'd had COVID. We asked whether it might be related to the vaccine. We know there are issues, particularly for men, younger men, from having had the COVID vaccine as well. But we know that obviously a lot of that is related to the fact of the type of virus it is that you're being vaccinated against. And saying that actually these long COVID clinics are being very well funded, and they'll carry out a heap load of tests that you wouldn't get on the NHS naturally and automatically. But the RCN, the Royal College of Nursing, what they're talking about is this postcode lottery. So in some areas, you're going to get this help, presumably if you've got a long COVID clinic with lots of funding. Otherwise, you're often left to your own devices.
Okay, so let me just address the bit about the vaccines and young men as you raised it. So myocarditis, we know that myocarditis via the vaccine route, short-lived, full recovery in most cases. Myocarditis via the infection route could be a lot more severe and prolonged. We know that. So let's address this RCN issue, Royal College of Nursing, which is, they say it's a postcode lottery. Herein, this is the great National Health Service that we have, which is, we've got something called NICE, National Institute for Clinical Excellence. So when we actually know what to do with long COVID management, there will be set series of gold standard management. And when we have a set series of procedures, protocols, medications to do, those should be applicable across the country, all over the place. And hopefully that should dilute a little bit of the postcode lottery that we do have.